Hello, everybody. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel, and this is Echoes of War, the podcast. I'm joined here by my co-host, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey Craig, great to be back here for a continuation of our series on the small timeline of history.
Damn right. And we're going to be tackling the Battle of Rivoli, which was a critical moment in European history during the War of the First Coalition. But before we jump into it, I just want to say, if you'd like to further support the channel, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. Over there, you get access to the exclusive podcast with more than 27 plus episodes and ongoing. And I just finished the latest episode, which is going to be about how corruption led to the downfall of the Beiyang fleet. And I'm just going to say it here. There was a poll, and all three out of the four choices were like neck and neck. So, kind of to make everyone happy, I'm just going to do all three episodes, and we'll see from where it goes from there. But yeah, that happened. I was very surprised by the choices. You also get early access to all the content I make, and of course, voting rights for, what had happened this week with the subjects that we're going to be tackling. And hopefully, if you join up, do leave comments as to what you want to hear specifically about because I try to please the audience. But today, like I had mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Battle of Rivoli. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I assume it's Rivoli. I do not know much
hmm
about this battle, by the way. I'm not great in the Napoleonic era. That's why Garov's going to be heading this one. But to give a little bit of a background, it's early 1797. The rival armies are clashing in the rugged terrain of northern Italy, and a confrontation is going to happen near the village of Rivoli. And it's going to come to define the Italian campaign. This encounter brought together some of the era's most prominent military leaders we're going to be talking about extensively, whose strategies and decisions are going to have far-reaching consequences, especially for our boy Napoleon. But Gaurav, I'm going to leave this in your hands for now, and I'll jump in when I can.
Sure. So I think before we jump into the details of not only the Rivoli and its affiliated campaign, perhaps let's take a bit of a breather and move a few years back as to why there is such a theater of operations. So the main thing is this is a part of the war of what is we know as the War of the First Coalition. That is, after the French Revolution reached its zenith, the the Jacobin government of France, trying to channel the public anger or such, and needing an enemy to unify the nation, declared war on the Habsburgs, which it became a war that involved almost every major European power pretty much ganging up against France. And at the same time, France has this big counter-revolution force, which is of the royalists within France. Somehow, over the first 2, 3 years of the war, France tides this over thanks to mass mobilization. Granted, the major European powers have not reached that same state of mobilization and readiness that the French Republic is on. And France is winning back, is pushing everyone back at all fronts. And by 1795, there's a massive change, both politically and militarily. Russia, Spain, and Portugal kind of pull out of the war. They sign a peace agreement with France. The Swiss and what we know as the Low Countries today, they have been pretty much conquered and annexed by the French Republic, most notably by the famous French General Jourdan at the Battle of Fleurus. And this is on the military front. On the political stage, the most extremist and popular revolutionary names, Robespierre, Danton, they have been overthrown and guillotined, ironically by the same set of laws that they used to deal out summary justice to any enemy of the Republic. And we have a French directory takeover. This is a five-man executive committee with a council of elders and a council of 500. So you can take it as your lower house or an upper house within the parliament, since they really wanted to be like the Roman Senate. Now, they are a pretty corrupt government, but that's a story for another time. When they take over, the military strategy is to knock out the Habsburg alliance, that is the Austrian Empire. And They planned this through a three-pronged invasion against Habsburg forces across the European theaters. The first two is, I think, the most important, at least when they had their plan, was the Rhine fronts. So they mobilized two pristine armies on the Rhine, which was the under generals Jean Moreau and Jean Jourdan, who at this time are the most famous and prominent generals of France, and arguably quite talented themselves. The Austrians, pretty much, which is the Austrian Empire's forces, supported by the duchies of Saxony, Bavaria, and Swabia, are going to be facing them. Now, the two armies on the Rhine are aimed at being the primary thrust. So they are going to get the bulk of the reinforcements, the bulk of the money, supplies, ammunitions, food, and whatever support. So Moreau wants 20,000 new soldiers. The directory will do its utmost to give it to him. The third assault is going to be where our story takes place, which was in Italy. However, the Italian front is seen as nothing but a diversion and sideshow, and the army's in a poor state, which we'll get to it when we arrive at the theater. Now, ultimately, just a brief thing on the Rhine campaign is it becomes an indecisive battleground. So while over the entire year of 1796, there are almost 30 battles, which there were two draws which kind of were more closer to Austrian victories, and almost 12 other Austrian victories to 16 French victories. And most of the French victories actually happened very early into the campaign, which is around June and July. And these are smaller engagements. And when Archduke Charles, brother of the Austrian emperor, takes command, we do see that pretty much the French forces are on the retreat, which is they stabilize the entire front. Now, the Italian theater is where our star of the show will take command, Napoleon Bonaparte. But maybe before we do that, Greg, maybe you can give a bit about Napoleon's early history,
Of
like
course.
before he takes command.
So for those who are actually been watching a lot of the episodes that have been coming out on our channel, something that we've kind of adapted to, like let's say, for example, when I was covering the Dutch naval war against Japan, is to have the other guy kind of look into, the military history behind some of the figures we're talking about, because, we name and list a lot of different people. And I mean, the general audience probably has no idea who we're talking about. I think in this case, Napoleon Bonaparte, people have a general idea, but I tried to find a lot of information on him prior to the battle in question. So I don't want to actually talk about, the Second Coalitionary War and everything that happens afterwards, like after 1800.
Hmm.
But for those who don't know, Napoleon Bonaparte, he was born August 15th of 1769, not in France. He was actually in Corsica. He is not actually French born, nor did he speak French as his first language, by the way. And of course, he's one of the greatest military leaders of history. I would argue he probably is the greatest military leader, given a lot of reasons, but I won't get into it. His military journey actually began at the Royal Military Academy in Brienne, later in the École Militaire en Paris, where he graduated in 1785 as a second lieutenant of artillery. This guy is a bona fide artilleryman. His Corsican heritage initially created friction within the predominantly French officer corps, but Napoleon's determination and his intelligence allowed him to rise quite quickly. Now, obviously, he lived during the French Revolution, and this provided opportunities for an ambitious officer like him. The upheaval led to the restructuring of the French military and the dismissal of many aristocratic officers, creating openings for talented individuals. Napoleon, his early success came during the siege of Toulon in 1793. The city had been seized by the royalist forces and handed over to the British. Napoleon's strategic placement of artillery batteries forced the British fleet to retreat, securing a Republican victory, and this success earned him a promotion to brigadier general at the age of just 24. By 1795, Napoleon played a crucial role in quelling the royalist uprisings in Paris, known as the 13 Vendémiaires. Using his artillery expertise, he dispersed the insurgents with a decisive whiff of grape shot, kind of something that he's known for, actually, solidifying his reputation as a bold and effective commander. This victory brought him to the attention of the French Directory, the ruling government at the time. Napoleon's next significant campaign began in 1796 when he was appointed commander of the French army of Italy. At just 26 years old, he inherited a poorly equipped and demoralized force, but despite these challenges, he demonstrated exceptional leadership, tactical ingenuity, and the ability to inspire his troops. In a series of stunning victories, he defeated the Austrian and Piedmontese forces, culminating in the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797. That's what we're going to be getting up to, actually. But the campaign established Napoleon as a military genius and a master of maneuver warfare, using speed, surprise, and flexibility to outwit his numerically superior foes. And I don't want to get into any of the key battles, but yeah, it kind of gives you an idea of the man. The man in question was brilliant by all measures, particularly with artillery, and he revolutionized warfare multiple times. Actually, later in history, more so, I'd say. But anyways, I desist. I guess we could get on with the story.
True enough. And thanks for pointing out, like, he's gonna be known for not only the artillery, but maneuver. So
Oh, one
I
last
think,
thing, just because I know the
yeah.
audience, the myth about his shortness. Just so the audience knows this, and I only loosely understand what happened. Napoleon was of average height, but the British had basically created, what was it, a propaganda about his height, and it had something to do not with his physical height, but something else. Do you know the story behind this by any chance, Gaurav?
For me, actually, what I've read is I think the French had a slightly different standard of measurement.
Oh, okay.
So if it were in our standard, scale, right? Napoleon would be about 5'6" ish, 5'7" types.
Okay.
But I think on the French scale, it was 5'2".
And I think the British referred to him as the short commander, but it wasn't, I forget why. It wasn't about his height. It was something else having to do with
I
him.
just know the misconception of this height is the difference in the systems, which
Okay.
is why the British just decided to use that 5'2" just to make him,
Yeah.
just a way to slander him
Just I had to
with
bring it
British
up because
cartoons.
I had to bring it up
Yeah,
because I know the
but
general audience, like that's one of the few things most people would say about
well,
Napoleon is his height. So.
if it's anything, Attila the Hun was way shorter than Napoleon.
All right.
Anyways, I think, as you mentioned, he puts down the royalist uprising on 13 Vendémiaire, saving because he's the only real general in Paris available. Granted, future directory and political ally Paul Barras is in command. Like as a politician, doesn't know anything about military. Napoleon does a tremendous job, which is why he's given the command of the army of Italy. And he's not really liked by the senior commanders when he takes over. And you can understand why. The three major commanders, who commanded the divisions in the army, General Serrier, Generals Oero, and Generals Massena, all future marshals of his empire, have been fighting and have a far superior claim to command. And they are way more experienced in combat. I mean, General Serrier is a soldier of almost 30 years of experience at this point. I mean, he first saw action in the 7 Years' War. Yeah, he's quite
It's almost as if he's from
experienced
a
to say
different
the truth.
age at that point. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and as I said earlier, the French Directory is given all the support to the armies of General Moreau and Jourdan. The Italian army, the men are on the verge of mutiny. They've not been paid. And I remember reading quite a lot of units did not have, forget having enough ammunition, they did not have guns. Quite a few units did not have shoes. And food and medical care was abysmal, to
And
say
for
the
the
least.
French, that's no bueno.
It's for any army, right? You need the
Particularly for
supplies.
the French, though, who notoriously, I've always read about having to have soup before, certain things, anyways. But
Fair
they're
enough.
exquisite with their food. Yeah.
Yeah. Napoleon is, however, aided by, I think, who I would arguably call his greatest assistant ever in his life, General Berthier. That guy knew logistics and planning for supplies and movements like no other, and he helps alleviate the situation. Now, one of the greatest things of Napoleon, and he takes over in Italy, is, as you said, Sardinia and Austria are fighting together, but they have a lot of animosity. And their generals still adopt the old school thought of trying to concentrate forces and go the shortest route and such. Which is why you see Napoleon's early successes, he goes for important targets, but not the way anyone foresaw. And he splits apart the Sardinian army and the Austrian army. And in a matter of 3 weeks, he ends the entire war with Sardinia on French terms. So Sardinia is knocked out after 4 years of war in 3 weeks by Napoleon.
Man, and during this
Now,
age, that is something. Yeah. Wow.
indeed. Now you have the battle. So that was the Battle of Mondovi, which pretty much kicked Sardinia out of the war. And the biggest benefit is it opened up much easier supply lines for Napoleon because some of the key fortresses were handed over to French control. Now, this would be his lifesaver as they continue because as he advances, he's gonna need a lot more men and supplies. Now, you have later the Battle of Lodi, which is slightly, if I'm not mistaken, Lodi is towards the east of Milan, and the Austrians are withdrawing. And what he does is he makes a bold attack, and in that he defeats the Habsburg rearguard, taking about a similar number of casualties in terms of killed wounded, but capturing over 1,800 more men. And yeah, then he's able to start moving further down to Italy because while Milan is sacrificed, even though it was the capital of the Austrian center of power in the region, where the Austrians plan to make their stand is this area called the Quadrilatero or the Quadrilateral Fortresses. So in northern Italy, at the towns of Legnago, Verona, Pescara, and Mantova, which are all south of Lake Garda in the north. This area, right, was four fortresses which dominated the northern Italian approach. You had to control this, especially Mantua, which is where you will see Napoleon invest a lot of time. He has a first unsuccessful siege of Mantua, but given the supply constraints and the limited forces, he has to break the siege because the Austrians, unlike the French, are pouring in reinforcements down to Italy.
Yeah, I think,
I think
for
I
the
did some
audience to
calculation.
just for the audience
Yeah.
to understand, like the Habsburg Empire, by at this point in history, I mean, yeah, it's coming kind of onto the end half, right? But it's immense. Like the amount of resources they have. They were the probably the most formidable player, other than I guess Tsarist Russia.
At this moment, they were the most formidable player in the war.
Yeah.
They are pouring in. I think I remember at one point between the start of him taking command of the army of Italy and towards Rivoli, and before the Battle of Rivoli, I think Napoleon got a grand total of about 14,000 reinforcements to his armies. And I think I calculated that Austria, the meantime, pushed in well north of 120,000 men. Yeah, that I think that explains a lot how he was
To
able to.
field that is incredible. It's a big
Yeah,
difference.
but this is like multiple columns coming in because he's had several armies beaten back. But and to top it all off, Napoleon had the crazy ass job by the Directory to kind of subdue Florence, the Papal States, and Naples. And he's not going to get any reinforcements in the summer.
God damn.
Luckily, he harsh words, a bit of show of force in Florence and Tuscany is enough to get them to calm down. So, anyways, we have an Austrian force under the Field Marshal Count Wurmser. He has about a 20,000 man garrison in the city, around 21,000. and they do mount a pretty active defense. And Mantua is unfortunately quite fortified, and on three sides is even covered by a swamp, so it makes besieging it very difficult. Anyways, the only thing going for them is Napoleon has slowly been starving them out. So keep in mind that for the audience, that the siege of Mantua has been going on for months. It's a siege that goes on from first goes on for 2 months between June to August, and then pretty much at the end of August 1796 till its final capitulation in February 1797. It's under siege and blockade. Supplies do not get through in the second half. The Austrians are going to take appalling losses, and not to mention the civilians. I think it reached a point before Rivoli that the Austrian garrison was reduced to eating, like, dogs and cats, and the civilians on rats. That was the situation. But the Austrians were still hopeful, and they needed to relieve Mantua because, as both them and Napoleon realized, this is the key battle, the key city. You win, whoever wins this battle, they win the theater of operations. Now, what happens for Napoleon is, while Count Wurmser is holding the garrison, you have a new commander take over the Austrian forces. And this is a man called, sorry, one moment, Joseph Alvinci. So he's from the Hungarian side of the Habsburg Empire. And he is quite an ambitious and aggressive commander, and not as rash about um, his counterparts. But maybe, Craig, you have anything that you would like to add just about Alvinci?
Yeah,
Since
sure.
he's been fighting Napoleon for a couple of months now.
So a little bit of the military background of Joseph Albinci. He was a Hungarian-born Austrian field marshal, renowned for his leadership during the wars against the revolutionaries in Napoleonic France. Albinci began his military career in the Austrian army in 1751, and he served in the Seven Years' War. So we got an old guy here, where he gained valuable experience in military strategy and combat. I guess the Seven Years' War really molded a lot of these older commanders. They would have been fixated on what happened in that war, being the basis of how warfare should be done. His prominence
Yeah.
grew during the French Revolutionary Wars, particularly during the War of the First Coalition that were involved in here. Albinsey distinguished himself in several key battles, including the battles of Gemepe, Neerwinden, that was in 1793, where his tactical skills contributed to an early Austrian success against the French. His role in the Austrian military was solidified through his command of forces in Italy and later at the head of the Austrian army in Germany. His military expertise was tested during the campaigns of the Second Coalition, notably in Italy in 1796, 1797, and he faced Napoleon Bonaparte, which we're getting into right now. So I don't want to give away too much, actually, about anything that we're going to be talking about here, but that's a little bit of a background on him. But I guess if you were to picture him as a commander, just have it in your mind that a lot of his experience came from the Seven Years' War, which was a catastrophic event for a lot of these guys. And yeah, so he would have took a lot of the lessons there.
True enough, and thanks for that. And so the first major battle is the battle on the bridge of Arcole, or commonly known as the Battle of Arcole. And he wrongfoots Napoleon quite badly, and Napoleon has to advance in a really exposed position, everything. And in that ensuing battle, ultimately, due to some poor communications, the Napoleon can claim the battlefield victory, but it's come at a heavy cost. So in that Battle of Arcole, Napoleon has lost almost 5,000 men compared to the 6,000 of the larger Austrian army. So it's pretty much, in terms of, you could say, in the army percentage, they took about equal losses. Now, after the Battle of Arcole, we now have the build up to, the key Battle of Rivoli. So Napoleon has now reorganize his army again. So, as we could see, commanders really love sacking their generals. Napoleon is no stranger to that. So, from his previous six division army of Italy is now gone. It's more consolidated. So maybe I'll just list where the forces are before the start of the battle. And Craig, you could just step in and just give a bit about each of these French generals. So the siege of Mantua currently is taken over by General Serurier, the old guard of Napoleon's army of Italy. And he has about 10,000 men keeping Wormser in check. Even though at this point, technically Wormser has more men, they are horribly weakened by starvation. Then at the same time, you have General Massena around the city of Verona. And then to the east of Mantua, you have General Augereau's division. But at the key town of Rivoli, you have General Barthélemy Joubert, who is keeping a watch on the northernmost approaches on the east side of Lake Garda and near the mountains. And Napoleon at this time, he has a strategic reserve of about 4,000 men at Bassano, much further west. They're right now not involved. And he's with a column of men trying to talk the Pope down, who's stirring up anti-French rhetoric again. So, Craig, perhaps you could just talk a little bit of the four divisional commanders that I just mentioned.
Yeah, so we'll start off in the order that you gave them. Jean-Mathieu Philibert was a French general known for his discipline, professionalism, and loyalty during the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. He was born in Laon. Sourier began his military career in the French Royal Army, serving again in the Seven Years' War. After retiring as a captain in 1780, he returned to service during the French Revolution, rejoining the army by 1791 at the age of 49. Honestly, not a bad age. He's not too old to, hand over that experience and be formidable. Sourier's experience and steady leadership earned him rapid promotion during the Revolutionary Wars. By 1794, he played a critical role in the French victories at the Battle of Liano, showcasing his organizational skills and his ability to manage troops effectively. Sourier became renowned for his disciplined command and insistence to orders, traits that helped him, under challenging conditions. As part of Napoleon Bonaparte's army in Italy, Sourier contributed significantly during the siege of Mantua, which we had just talked about. His methodological siege operations leadership in the battle were instrumental in forcing the Austrian garrison to capitulate, solidifying French dominance in northern Italy. Although Sourier's cautiousness and methodological approach contrasted with the more aggressive generals, it certainly complemented Napoleon's bold strategies, earning him respect, and he was quite dependable. He was a very capable officer. Next,
And
I
I would just say one thing, given the other generals, he was more harsher on his men against looting the civilian
oh, okay.
population, given that the other two of our fellow generals that we're talking about were known looters themselves.
And despite the fact it's awful to say, one of a very important quality back then, this is especially notorious for Chinese commanders during the Qing dynasty, knowing when to let your men loot and when to not let your men loot, it could make or break your army. Just to say that. Sometimes you gotta let them
True
do
enough,
it.
true enough. But as you said, Napoleon did give orders against not looting.
Yeah.
But given that two of the top division commanders were like, they encouraged their men to do it, it had limited effects. So
Yeah.
perhaps, given the order I mentioned, I guess we can talk about Massena.
Okay, so André Massena. He was one of Napoleon Bonaparte's most trusted marshals. He was considered a brilliant strategist and a great leader during the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. He was born in Nice. He was enlisted in the French army at the age of 17, and he served for 14 years before leaving the military. He rejoined during the French Revolution, quickly rising through the ranks due to his leadership skills and battlefield successes. Seen his earlier triumphs came during the Revolutionary Wars, particularly in Italy. As a general, he played a key role in the siege of Mantua, again, where his relentless campaigns contributed to Napoleon's victories against the Austrian forces. His tactical ingenuity and ability to manage scarce resources earned him the nickname The favorite child of victory. It's an interesting
I
nickname.
really like that name.
It's not. It's not. I don't know. I'm not keen on that one. That's not a great one. You could do better than that. Anyways, but to go a little bit further in history, in 1799, Massena achieved one of his most celebrated victories at the Second Battle of Zurich. Commanding French forces, he decisively defeated a combined Russian-Austrian army, securing French dominance in Switzerland and bolstering his reputation as a master tactician. He was known to be quite bold, adaptive, and he had the ability to inspire troops under very challenging circumstances, like when resources are scarce. Mhm.
I will just add one thing since you just went a bit into the future about the legacy
Mhm.
Massena had with, even though they were still at war, I've noticed enemy commanders tended to really respect each other,
Oh, okay.
even if they might overtly never not fully admit to it. The Duke of Wellington, in his Iberian campaign, said, "When Massena was in the field against me, I never slept well."
That's a pretty big compliment. I guess next
Yeah.
is Charles-Pierre Augereau. Again, he was a French general and a marshal of the empire, renowned for his very daring and quite amazing leadership during the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. He was born in Paris, so he's a Parisian. Ugh, I won't hold that against him. Augereau had a colorful early life, serving in various European armies before joining the French Revolutionary Forces in 1792. He was very charismatic, he had quite a personality, a lot of combat experience, and it helped him rise through the ranks. Augereau's military career flourished during the Italian campaigns that we are currently talking about under Napoleon Bonaparte. He commanded a division in the Army of Italy and he demonstrated exceptional bravery and tactical skill, playing a critical role in the battles over Castillon and Arcole. At Arcole, Augereau's audacious leadership, charging enemy positions while holding the French flag, became legendary and it showcased his ability to rally troops in the heat of battle. I think there is a
I would
painting
just
of him. Yeah.
just also add, it was at Castiglione where his men had been fighting heavily
Hmm.
even before Napoleon and Massena came to reinforce him with the rest of the army. And when people would later criticize Augereau, Napoleon would defend it like, without him at Castiglione, we never would have won the theater.
Hmm. He was widely acclaimed to be fearless, given the experience he had during some of these battles, and he was considered a very dependable commander. He's very aggressive. He was very tenacious in battle, and of course, he's one of the key figures that's going to mark a lot of Napoleon's successes. And last
I,
but
I
not
will just I would just say one thing. He was quite opportunistic.
okay,
So he was a committed Republican. So
oh,
he initially was not in favor of Napoleon's seizure of power as emperor.
but a lot of people, were on the other side that turned. But yeah,
True, but he saw where the winds was changing.
hey,
So
some of
he
the
quickly
smartest men
declared
know
his,
how to sit on the fence.
yep, he did it. And similarly, he actually, when Napoleon was to be deposed in 1814, he was one of the guys who publicly decried Napoleon as a guy who doesn't know to die like a soldier.
Ooh.
And the funny thing is, in 1850, when Napoleon returns, he offers his service again, and Napoleon's like, "No ways."
Oh, what a piece of shit.
But
Yeah.
but one thing I love about Ojiro is in 1799 he saved my boy Lance. So Jean Lance, I know I'm digressing a little bit, but Jean Lance at this moment in the Italian theater is a brigadier, commands the grenadiers of the army,
Hmm.
even though, and he's technically within Ogiro's division.
Okay.
And later he becomes one of Napoleon's most trusted generals, and along with Davout, probably the best two field marshals Napoleon could ever have had.
Fair enough.
Anyways,
We have one
the
last
thing
guy, I
is,
think.
yeah, just one more thing about Lance.
Yeah.
Ojero saved Lance from being kicked out of the army for good because Murat and Bessières, two other marshals, kind of did not like Lance and they tried to get him kicked out by, you know, saying that he was in debt and everything, and Ojero bailed him out. So thank you, Ojero, for that. You saved my boy Lance.
Nice. And
Yep.
last but not
And
least, we have
yep.
Barthélemy Catherine Joubert. Man, that middle name sucks. That Catherine as a middle name, Jesus, was a French. Oh, it's my sister's middle name, by the way. Was a French general whose meteoric rise and ultimately death
You,
marked him
you sure
as
you want to let your sister know that you don't like the middle name?
Oh, she knows. Her middle name is terrible. Well, my middle name is pretty bad too. But anyways, I come from an old British family. It's Stuart. It's really bad, but yeah. His French general, whose meteoric rise and ultimately his death marked him as one of the most promising military figures of the Revolutionary Wars. Born in Pontoise, in France, Joubert joined the military as a volunteer in 1791 during the upheaval of the French Revolution. Joined as a volunteer. Huh. His aptitude for leadership and combat quickly earned him promotions through the ranks. Jalbert's early career was defined by the involvement in campaigns against the Austrians in the Piedmont in Italy, serving under, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte during the campaign we're talking about. He gained recognition for his bravery, tactical acumen, and the ability to inspire his troops. He played a significant role in the Battle of Rivoli, which I don't want to get into, obviously. But a little bit later in history, in 1798, Joubert was assigned independent command in the campaigns in northern Italy and Switzerland. Despite facing quite a lot of challenges, he solidified his reputation as a skilled leader, and he was able to handle complex operations under very difficult terrain. Joubert's career was cut short during the Battle of Novi in 1799. While leading French forces against the coalition army, he was struck down early in the engagement, dying at the really young age of 30. His life and career was very brief, but his military exploits reflected he was a very courageous man, he was very competent, and he was known to be quite loyal.
Quite humble.
Yeah.
And interestingly, he was the same age as Napoleon, 1769.
Yeah.
So, yeah, two really young generals involved in this battle. And just to add one thing, in when the French Directory under Barras planned their coup of 18 Brumaire initially, they needed an army sword general, like a guy to be from the army to be a sword. The first general of choice for them was actually Joubert. But, well, he was dead by then, so yeah. So I think now that we've introduced all our main generals who will be involved in this battle, let's take a situation stock of how the Battle of Rivoli plays out, shall we? So at the start of the battle, right? The garrison and the main thing of the battle is obviously Mantua, where we know that is the key to Italy. And the Austrians are now gathering in the Tyrol a massive army. So they are going to be attacking. And Napoleon, as usual, is not getting reinforcements and is getting ever more demanding tasks from the director. So in January, they have to relieve the city by the middle towards the end of Jan, otherwise it's over. Now, Alvinci is reinforced that his army in the mountains is now exceeding almost for over 46,000 men and equipment. It's a massive army. Napoleon is right now having around 10,000 men of General Serrier, who is not going to participate in the battle because he is holding down Mantua. While it's weakened and there are only maybe a similar number of soldiers, there are more Austrian defenders that are not dead. They're starving. So he can afford to besiege them while being outnumbered. Then at the same time, General Oero is to the west. He has about 9,000 men, and he's watching the eastern approaches to Mantua. And Messena is in Verona, just kind of as a guard between the two. Like, think of it as a linchpin between, the northern and eastern approaches, which are the only ways anyone else can come to Mantua right now. And at the same time, near the southwestern part of Lake Garda. Sorry, just screw that up. He has a strategic reserve of about 4,000 men. Now, Juba is now a divisional commander. He got the promotion just before Rivoli, and he is obviously keeping eye on the northern plateau base, and is going to concentrate his forces around the town of Rivoli, which is obviously an ideal defensive location and quite near Verona, which is one of the four quadrilateral fortresses of part of the quadrilateral fortress of Austria. Now, at this point, Napoleon is kind of south, trying to put pressure on the Pope. Now, Alvinci has to hurry. So what he does is he splits his army first into two. He detaches about 14,000 men to march down, like, from Venice and come from the east. And this, he hopes, is going to wrong-foot Napoleon, that he will at least draw away a bulk of his forces to meet this decoy force. It's nothing more than a decoy under General Provera. And then he can use his much larger army, go down the Alps past Lake Rivoli and Lake Garda, and relieve Mantua. And it looks like, and there is precedence. People in this time, they don't really innovate. So it's a good bet to guess that someone is going to do the same thing again at this time. So Napoleon does think that it could be there. Now, unfortunately, he and his staff officers are a bit dumb, to say the least, General Alvinci. So his 30,000 main force, approximately, is divided into 6 columns. The first column has a very great task of trying to outflank Joubert's forward outpost at Ferrara. So it's a small settlement north of Mantua on the main valley. And the second and third column are going to make a frontal assault. Now, unfortunately, they forgot to consider one thing. It's January in the Alps. Weather is freezing. There are very slow, it's snowed in. It's destroying momentum. The men cannot move. And the planned path, which might have been traversable in the summers, is not at all usable in the winter. They have to take a much wider outflanking route. And there's no firewood for these men in the mountains. And yeah, I think they're at an altitude of almost 2,000 meters. So yeah, it was not a pleasant situation. And I think they lost around 200, 300 men just to, the cold. So
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
small, yeah. Ultimately, you know, the second and third columns and these first guys also attack. And that's all Joubert has is really a small watch force. It's not at all close to his main army, main detachment. And they skirmish a bit and they just, give Alvinsi's men a bit of a bloody nose, inflicting slightly more casualties on them, and then they fall back. In the meantime, um, and this is actually quite there, like a British attaché was like, it was quite stupid to even, I mean, I'm not paraphrasing, I was quoting him exactly, but the message was like, it was quite stupid to even consider such a movement that where basis whether you are determining an entire operation. Well, we've seen that's going to repeat in 1944, just saying. And so Napoleon returns to north of Mantua. There's a small village called Rovabella. And he now gets multiple reports. So so the decoy forces attacked both Oero and Massena's divisions at Verona and at Legnago. And it looks like they are going to cross the river and try to break in. And he also knows Joubert has also been attacked, at least at his outpost. Now he doesn't know which is the main strike. He's like, could he try something new? Could he be, trying to take one of the two eastern passages like he did last time? If so, which passage is he going to take? And his forces are thinly spread out. Napoleon does not have the manpower to counter it. If you include the garrison at Mantua, there are over, I think, over 60,000 Austrian soldiers in the field. So it's quite, and his total force is about 43,000. So for him, he has to guess correctly what is the enemy's true intention, or else he's finished. And luckily for him, Joubert sends a message of confirmation saying that, hey, you know what? This is actually the main battle. They are coming down here because he's now detected the first column, which is making the wide outflanking route march. And then he deduces that this has to be the main assault. Otherwise, if it's a decoy force, why would you go that extra steps to have a massive outflanking force? So he informs Napoleon that, you know, this is going to be the key battle. You got to get over here. And Napoleon, once he ponders the research, like the information that Joubert has sent over, is, on the night of 13th January, he's like, yep, this is it. Sorry, the day of 13th January, my bad. And within no time, he shows again a characteristic that makes a general brilliant: decisiveness. There's no ambiguity. Everyone knows what their job is. Immediately, Massena's division is marching north to reinforce Joubert. And this is going to be a bit of a march because it's 20 kilometers after they've just battled a decoy force. They have to march 20 kilometers overnight and be ready
Yeah.
for battle.
Yeah, that's gonna
Uh,
impede a bit on their performance.
Not really. As you said, you pointed out the generals of Napoleon, they were good commanders themselves. But yeah, Massena's forces are to march north, and he's ordered Oero to give up most of his cannon and cavalry and send them north as well. The infantry is just going to be screening the decoy force, and his reserve is now moving forward as well. And they are moving to uh, Castelnuovo, so they're kind of more in a central position. They can either move kind of almost equidistant to Mantua, to the eastern parts of where Augereau's division is now going to be remaining, and Rivoli, which is actually a smart move. And General Serrier is told to be on high alert, since it could be possible that the garrison has now received the information that a relief is coming, so they might try to sally out and interdict the French positions. And Napoleon himself is rushing north to help Joubert, rally his forces. And Joubert has, anyways, knowing that he faces a much sizable enemy army, has withdrawn to the Rivoli Plateau. Again, the main thing is this is a plateau, so this is where we are going to see, the terrain also play a big role. Now, the Austrians, as I said, they're coming in 6 columns. The first is going to be like that big outflanking column, and their job once they reach north of the Rivoli Plateau is to continue outflanking, going south via west, and cut off the exit of the Rivoli Plateau. The second to fourth columns are going to just launch a frontal assault. The fifth column is going to come up a valley and kind of hit them on the flank. And the sixth column, which is on the other bank of the river Adige, will just be a supporting force, pouring in fire with their cannons. Now, Joubert has put his men north of the town on the night of 13th of January in a kind of semicircular defensive formation. And Napoleon comes and he sees the dispositions, and he can see four enemy columns. So mind you, he cannot see the first column because they're on the outmarch, and the sixth column is quite far behind. So, yeah, then, the camps are there. And what he does is he wants to even the odds for now in a defensive battle, because Massena's division, which is going to be the main reinforcements for Joubert's in Napoleon in this battle, have not yet arrived. They're still marching to the battlefield. What he does is he says that the valley on the Joubert's eastern flank, where the Austrian fifth column is going to come. He says if he can entrench himself, put some 1,000 men to 2, 3 battalions, and have cannons, they can hold them off in a defensive posture. And anyways, as the main column is still, the first column is still going to go outflanking, and the six columns are going to be directly involved. The numerical disparity, as you can see, is kind of coming down. So what he wants is Joubert's division to move ahead and take some of the heights just in front of Rivoli, like a bit near the San Marco and everything. So they hold the edge of the plateau. So this is quite a very early morning assault when Joubert's men start moving towards the chapels at the edge of the plateau, and within no time you have a lot of fighting right around 5 a.m. on a cold January morning. And unfortunately for Napoleon, I think just due to the momentum and everything and the heat of battle, the Austrians wake up quite quickly and react. And he had just hoped to quickly just take it and consolidate. And unfortunately for him, what has happened is it's now become a full-on mass attack. The frontal columns are now forming up to, attack his main force. So now these guys are going to have been fighting for over 4, 5 hours before Massena's troops start to arrive. And just prior to this, some of Joubert's divisions actually started to break. The one division did valiantly hold its ground, which is the 14th Demi Brigade. And every time they would lose their cannons, their officers would demand, like, are you going to let the enemy take this? You're not going to do that. And they just charge back. But ultimately, they do hold off long enough for Massena to come, and he takes position on the left of Joubert's line. So now the French line has stabilized, the Austrians cannot outflank. And what now, unfortunately for Napoleon, the sixth column has now arrived. They're on the far side, and they pour flanking cannon fire on Napoleon's east flank defenses, against the valley that leads up to Rivoli. So that causes the entire force there to rout, since unfortunately moving artillery and using artillery to outflank was, I think, only something that Gustavus Adolphus did very well. So they start to retreat, and the Austrians are starting to pour in. And some of Joubert's division units see this, and they start withdrawing. The panic factor. And at the same time, Napoleon's forces are also quite exhausted themselves. They've been fighting for hours, or if you're Massena's men, you've just been marching for a few hours to get to the battle, and then immediately tossed in. And then he hears gunfire from the south, which is the first Austrian column, has now finally, reached the southern tip of the Rivoli Plateau and are poised to completely cut off Napoleon. If this went out, you're going to have a situation where Napoleon's entire army is just encircled by the Austrians with no supplies or way out. That would have been defeat. And then, at this time, he is showing his amazing ability to stay calm. Because just think about it. You're pressed on all fronts. Your forces are pretty much, at this point, I think around 90% of all available French troops are committed to battle on one of the various fronts.
Yeah, that's scary.
Your enemies are also heavily committed, but they outnumber you. Your men are tired and you're cut off. What do you do? And on top of that, one of the positions is just pouring flanking fire onto you. Most generals would be on the capitulation front. And it was said like Napoleon he just calmly assesses the entire situation, and he's just like, yep, they are ours. That supreme self-confidence that he just shows is I have to admit, it's just one of the most admirable uh characteristics I have in this man. He had an ego, but he sure as hell could keep calm, analyze, and he backed his ego up. So he realizes that the column coming up the valley is the main immediate threat, and he needs to focus. So he, whatever free guns he has, and whatever units Joubert can spare, which is just going to be a few hundred men, he needs them to come and hold off the advance. And while they do this, his cannons, they manage to hit um, a 15 battery gun. They start pouring canister and grape shot against the advancing Austrians. Now, the problem is they are coming through a valley. You have a narrow front. This is mowing down the Austrian front lines, and that's heavily demoralizing them.
I literally just realized maybe do you just want to explain to the audience the difference between a regular artillery and the grape shot?
Yeah. So the most common shot that you would see at this era of warfare was called the round shot, which, as its name implies, is just a round cannonball of a certain weight that's fired. And it's quite good for, mowing down people in a straight line. So it has more penetrative power, but it cannot attack on a broader front. So any dense formation like a column, it's quite vulnerable to a round shot because if you have a properly placed round shot, just imagine it like going through the column of men like a bowling ball going and mowing down skittles. I think that's the only explanation I can think of.
That's pretty good, yeah.
But that which is actually one of the reasons why you actually see the line formations being used because it does because this is the most common type of shot. So to counter it, the line formation actually limits your casualties from them because you might just lose like maybe 6, 7 men, but better to lose 6, 7 men than 40, 50. So that is the round shot. However, canister grape shot is just like a small casing filled with pellets. So you could just think of it like a cannonball shotgun
A cannonball
for the lack
shotgun
of
is
a better.
perfect. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. So it does not have like the deep penetrative power as a round shot, but at close range, it's going to mow down the front line. So this is, for example, Craig, as you alluded in when Napoleon saved the Directory in the coup before he got command of the army of Italy. That is the famous whip of grape shot. That is also another term for canister shot. This is what he would use here, and it's psychologically and physically pretty harrowing for the front lines. Now, natural shortcoming is it's very short. It's short range. I think another great example, which was in the future, was at the Battle of Eylau, where the French, I think it was the seventh or eighth corps under Marshal Augereau, they were advancing against the Russians and got completely lost in a blizzard. And when the blizzard cleared, they were right, that entire corps was right in front of the Russian main batteries. And they had already been loaded up with canister shot and fired at 100 meters or so into the core.
Yeah, that would have been
That entire
carnage.
core was brutalized. I wouldn't even say decimated, brutalized. It just pulled out. Took months to recover. So I think that's why that was a devastating effect that Napoleon and his cannon had in the battle. And at one point, uh, an enemy ammo wagon just blew up, hit by a lucky shot. But that psychologically terrified the Austrians. And now there's a mayhem, right? So first of all, just you have a valley. So you have men coming in from the back, trying to push forward as they try to come in and exit onto the Rivoli plateau. But the French cannons have inflicted a heavy toll on the Austrian front lines, and these guys are trying to retreat. And onto this, Napoleon launches his cavalry. Now, cavalry is never good against an organized mass of infantry. However, well, they're not. They're not at all close to cavalry, like organized. And Napoleon just has a few hundred horsemen. I think uh, at the most, he had, yeah, I just did a quick check. He had around 400 horsemen in total, like around 410. And in this confusion, he launches them against the mass of Austrians in this column. And one very prominent French cavalry commander, who's right now just a captain, Captain Lassalle, they literally, he took 26 horsemen and they took 5 enemy flags and captured an entire battalion alone.
Damn. Nice.
Yep. So here you just have, and this few units I told you, this few hundred men, Napoleon had asked Joubert to spare any man that he could. They are on top of the hill, overlooking the valley, pouring fire down. The confusion and mayhem is total. The Austrians on this column are in full retreat.
Oh my
And
God.
the sixth column, anyways, is not going to be of any threat. They can't do anything, so they also withdraw. Because the positions and opportune target areas have completely vanished. And now, all these men, horsemen, and guns are now trained onto the frontal Austrian columns. And these guys have been fighting for hours and hours. They're completely spent. And now you just suddenly see new cannons and horsemen charging at you. Many of them lost the will, and the retreat was not there. It was a rout. Even amusingly, it was said that General Alvinci had come forward with his staff, urging the men on. And yeah, he went into an unglorious retreat just to avoid being captured. And at the same time, the first column, uh, you know, they meet general. They are the strategic reserve have moved up also. That brigade of 4,000 men of Napoleon's strategic reserve, they moved out, and yeah, here you have a future marshal, General Victor. He plays a key role, and they inflict about 50% casualties on the first column. Now, mind you, these guys are quite cross-Britain to say the least. And yeah, so the supply lines to Rivoli remain open. And the Austrian main force is in full retreat. And when we talk about the casualties, it's crazy. So it's estimated around 28 to 30,000 Austrians fought in this battle, and about 22,000 Frenchmen. Napoleon lost around 3,500 men killed, wounded, missing. For the Austrians, their losses were just horrific. Yeah, I think if you include all the captured and missing, they had about 4,000 killed and wounded. And over the next 2 days, they captured over 13,000 Austrians. You're talking about 60% of this army has been killed or captured. Killed, wounded, captured, sorry. They are in complete retreat. Now, this has destroyed Mantua's only hope of relief. So this was the battle that really tipped over the campaign. Now, there's still more to happen in the entire theater because now Napoleon has all the initiative and momentum. And just to add insult to the French is, sorry, to the Austrians, my bad, is Joubert is left with his division alone to just, mop up operations in that area. Massena and Napoleon are marching down south to Mantua, where, the decoy force under General Provera, they are making a dash to try to link up with Mantua and try to break out together. And Oero, he can't react quickly to them since he's sent a lot of his cavalry and guns, but he's already smashed the rear guard to bits. of the Austrians. And when the when this new force arrives to this Austrian force under General Provera, Wormser also sallies forward, but Sevier is waiting. And at the same time, Wormser has come. Massena and his division has started to arrive into the theater. And so Wormser's half-starved, well, not half-starved, like fully starved men are pretty much, you know, easily beaten back. And Sevier and Massena's men form one kind of arm over Provera's men, who now are attacked again by General Oero on the 16th of January from behind. And in this battle, the French suffer about 2,000 casualties, most of them just wounded. The Austrians, just over 8,000 casualties.
Wow, that's a big disparity.
Indeed. And unfortunately for the people of Mantua, more than anyone else, the city is not surrendered till 2nd February when their ordeal finally ends. City surrendered and Wormser, is sent back to Austria. But the Italian theater has been won completely. But but Napoleon, it's kind of just a start, because finally, despite after 8 months of begging the Directory for help, they're finally sending help in a big way. So another future major name, General Bernadotte, had been detached from General Moreau's army. These are pretty impressive winter crossing of the Alps, and brings with him over 40 to 50,000 fresh troops into the Italian theater of operations. Maybe you would like to take a few minutes to talk about Bernadotte.
Yes, sure. So, his original name, Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, although he'll eventually go under the name Charles the 14th, taking also the name John, because he's going to become the king of Sweden, if I am correct in that assessment.
Yep.
I didn't know this guy, so when I read about the history behind him, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. He's from the house of Bernadotte. He was born in Pau, France. He entered the French military at a very young age, and he quickly rose through the ranks due to his talent and keen leadership. His early career was shaped by a lot of the turmoil of the French Revolution, in which he served in various campaigns against the European coalitions. Bernadotte gained significant recognition during the Napoleonic Wars. He was a Marshal of France, and he played a crucial role in several key battles, such as the Battle of Austerlitz, which is a huge one, and the Battle of Leipzig, which we had already covered in a previous podcast. His
But not on Napoleon's side. Please
yeah,
add that.
his military expertise, particularly in managing large, complex battles, earned him Napoleon's trust at the time, I guess. Bernadotte commanded the Army of the North in 1813, where he fought against the Russians and Prussians, though he faced a lot of challenges with the shifting tides of the war. And I guess I don't need to talk too much
I
about the
think just
future, but
one great thing I found interesting about him. Start of the year 1794, he was promoted from captain to major of in the French army. And by October of that year, he was a divisional general.
man, that's quick. That's really quick.
Yeah, even Napoleon, Joubert, and many others like who are his marshals never had a as meteoric of a rise.
And I
1 year,
mean,
man.
so he rises very quickly in the military, but then he ends up becoming a king, and he has to focus his career on, the diplomacy and the statesmanship of modernizing Sweden. So this guy had a very interesting life, yeah.
Indeed, and he was brilliant at administration, but he, and not to mention, he was kind of by marriage and law related to Bonaparte.
Oh, okay.
So his wife was the first fiancée of Napoleon before he married Josephine, and her sister is the brother of Napoleon's brother Joseph. So they're family.
Yep.
But yeah, so after this battle and the surrender of Mantua, what we have is Napoleon with this new reinforced army with Massena, Serrier, Bernadotte. making a big charge into towards Vienna. And even Joubert is also told to move via the Tyrol, but at a slow pace. So you can see that's complete momentum because I think the French directly finally have woken up and said this is probably the best way to win. And you have towards the end of March, you have the Battle of Tarvis, which was I think the last significant battle of the entire war, where Archduke Charles has now been transferred from all the Habsburg Rhine River front to this front, but he's not had the time to marshal his troops. And maybe given the prominence that he's going to be playing in history, you would want to talk a little bit of the Archduke.
Yeah, so Archduke Charles was the Duke of Teschen. He was a prominent Austrian general and one of the most talented military commanders of the early 19th century. He was born in the Habsburg family, received a very rigorous military education, and he began his career in the Austrian army at a very young age. His early service was marked by his participation in the wars against revolutionary France, in which he gained a reputation for strong leadership and being a very good strategician. He is best known for his role during the War of the Second Coalition, particularly during his leadership at the Battle of Stockach, where he decisively defeated French forces under Jean-Baptiste Moreau. He also had a lot of success continuing with the Battle of Zurich in 1799, where he forced the French into a retreat, earning him a lot of recognition as one of Austria's most capable commanders. During the Napoleonic Wars, Archduke Charles continued to fight against Napoleon's forces, most notably in 1809 during that campaign. Despite hard-fought battles, he was unable to prevent Napoleon's victory at the Battle of Wagram, where nonetheless he did prove to be very skillful in organizing and commanding Austrian forces. He was instrumental in modernizing the Austrian military, emphasizing discipline, training, and logistics. Ultimately, he would not really prevail against Napoleon, I guess, per se, but it seems that he was quite a renowned figure for the Austrians.
Uh, I'll just add, he did inflict a major defeat on Napoleon, the first one he got as emperor at the Battle of Aspern-Essling.
There you
That
go.
is, I do agree that he's one of the most underrated commanders of the time. So yeah, it's kind of sad that he just kind of fades away after 1809 from prominent military role. But he was, some people said defensive, but when needed, he's going to be quite aggressive. So yeah, unfortunately, when he first squares off against Napoleon at this time in the Italian theater, the Austrian morale is low. He's not had time to consolidate his forces and prepare an active defense, and Napoleon is just too quick. And at the Battle of Tarvis, again, over half the Austrian army is killed or captured. And with the road to Vienna now completely open, you have the an armistice negotiations stop. And this is what also convinced Austria was that Moreau's remaining army had already crossed the Rhine and was starting its march to Vienna from the west.
Yeah, that seems like you're doomed.
Pretty much. So you have ultimately the Treaty of Campo Formio that is signed, which is the official end to the War of the First Coalition. So a lot of Austrian territories were given to France, and this included the Austrian Netherlands, which is like modern day Belgium, and Venice was half split between Austria and France.
Wow, it goes to show my knowledge of this era. I had no idea Austria had their fingers that far. Okay.
Well, northern Italy for quite a while was part of the Holy Roman
Yeah.
Empire, and also like the Balkans by the Austrian Habsburg
Hmm.
Empire. It's kind of weird, right? The Austrian Empire was also a bit separate from the Holy Roman Empire, but since the same family ruled both,
Yeah, of course.
yeah,
I'm well versed on Austrian rule of the Balkan countries. I took history of the Balkans and the Yugoslavian history and all that, and what a wild just pot of boiling hatred that would cause World War
yeah.
One in a lot of ways. Yeah.
So you have, but however, Venice's possessions in the Mediterranean and the Ionian Sea were given to France. Yeah, and all Italian states was supposed to be swearing the fealty to France and not the Holy Roman Emperor, aka Austria, which pretty much kind of ended Austrian influence in most of Italy, which had been a case for over a few centuries and by the Holy Roman Emperor well over a millennia. And there was also some secret clauses that Napoleon and the emperor signed together about territory exchanges.
Of course.
Yep, so this pretty much unfortunately set the stage for a bad peace because we all know a bad peace always leads to a new war.
Of course.
But this is, I guess, where I would end like the Battle of Rivoli,
Mhm.
given how it was the pivotal battle that completely changed ended the war, in my view, of the First
Awesome.
Coalition.
And
So, yeah, that's it from me, Craig.
before we close out, again, if you'd like to further support the channel, please check out my YouTube membership over at the Pacific War Channel on YouTube, or you can join my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. Joining either gets you access to the exclusive podcast with over 27 plus episodes and ongoing, another episode added each month, sometimes two, and you'll get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Also, there's big development coming very soon, but it is not 100% yet, so I guess I won't say anything here, but I can say this. Echoes of War is going to have a very large presence on YouTube. And you're probably
Looking
listening to
forward to
this
it.
episode on YouTube. I just don't know in what format yet, but a lot of big news on its way. So, yeah. Thank you, Gaurav. This is a really entertaining episode, and I do love the Napoleonic era, but I lack the depth because I just haven't read enough into it. I have a lot of books on my Christmas list that I'm going to start hitting up that aren't about the Pacific War for once. It's nice to get out of there, but I am a hostage to the contracts I have with KNG. I've had to dedicate myself almost 99% to the history of the Qing Dynasty and the fall of it, and well, the fall of China until 1949, and of course the Pacific War. So it's nice to jump outside and actually do other history. But again, till next time, this has been Echoes of War.